Started just so everybody knows. This is Cascade's third targeted tag meeting. Just to remind everyone, the purpose of these targeted tag meetings is to discuss methodology. We're not locking down any energy efficiency numbers yet. So we're just talking purely methodology. We're hoping to receive feedback throughout this presentation. We will have a really good presentation from Caleb Reimer, our manager of energy efficiency on the Washington side of things. Can I get a thumbs up if people can see the presentation? Perfect. Thank you. Today we're not going to go through introductions, but I do want to remind people that if you jump on and have a question, please introduce yourself and your title and the company you are representing. That way other people know who is asking the questions. What we'll do is we will go through a safety moment, and then Caleb will give a presentation on demand side management, the CPA, and then we'll be opening up for feedback. Just a reminder throughout this presentation, if you have questions, please feel free to interrupt us, put your hand up, put questions in the chat. We'll have people monitoring the chat, and we'll try to stop throughout the presentation and answer your questions. We did receive some questions prior to this meeting that we'll probably be trying to respond to throughout the presentation as it flows with the presentation. And then I think that's about it. So I'll pass it over to Jenny. Are you doing the safety moment?
Yep.
Okay, so I'll let you jump in and do the safety moment.
All right. Thank you, Brian. My name's Jenny DeBoer. I'm a resource planning economist for Cascade. I'm just going to do a quick safety moment for us. We'll do coping with stress. It's pretty easy to get stressed out these days between just the toil of life and reading the news every day can be pretty stressful. So it's important to know how to cope with stress when it pops up. One thing, take a break from reading and watching social media and news if it's stressing you out. It's okay to step back. Another thing, take care of your mind and body. So try to incorporate deep breathing and meditation into your daily routine. Try to eat well-balanced, healthy meals. Try to cut out sugar and caffeine if you're particularly stressed and replace those with whole foods, vegetables, and fruits. Make sure we're getting plenty of sleep. That's sure to exacerbate any stress you're feeling if you're not sleeping. Make sure to exercise regularly. This is a really good way to manage stress, and avoid alcohol and drugs. Make sure we're taking time to unwind and participating in hobbies and activities that we enjoy. Make sure that we are also engaging in people that we trust and trusting them with some of our stress. That'll be all for our safety moment today. Over to you, Caleb.
Thanks, Jenny.
Yeah, welcome everyone. I'm going to see if I can take control of this presentation if you don't mind, Brian. 1 second here.
Yep. Okay, you should have control now.
Okay, I'm going to see if this is working on my end. Great, it looks like it's working here, so I'll get this started here. My name is Caleb Reimer. I am the manager for Cascade's Energy Efficiencies Program, particularly in the state of Washington. Today, we know we're talking about the Washington IRP, and in particular, it's going to be the demand side management forecast. I'm going to go to the next slide here, which I believe outlines some of the content. Let's see if it'll switch. There we go. Some of the topics we have for us. An overview, I'm going to talk about the program performance historically as well as more recent in 2023, and then spend some time talking about the conservation potential assessment, which you'll hear me refer to as the CPA going forward. The CPA it's a huge driver for the program. It's a vision for us on what our potential should be going forward. So I'd like to make sure we talk a bit about the methodologies and the mindset that goes into building that CPA. We'll have a handful of slides talking about the energy efficiency forecast, as well as the energy efficiency programs, which are a subset of that forecast. We typically think of them in three different manners, being commercial, industrial, residential, and then the portfolio overall. Of note, when I talk about the CPA, most of these results are coming from the 2023 CPA, which was filed in June of 2023. That process repeats approximately every 2 years. The first slide is an overview. This is very similar to what I shared about 2 years ago for a similar meeting. On the left, you'll see our EE annual savings, 2008 to present. So about 15 years of history for us for a fairly developed program. Therms is going to be your y-axis and our program year on the x-axis. And you'll notice three different color schemes. Blue being residential, which is where I and a lot of our team spends most of our time. The low income, we could think of as a low income weatherization, which Noemi Ortiz manages. And then the commercial program, which we oversee, but it is typically run by TRC companies who are the implementer of that program. If you're looking for general trends, you can see in blue, the residential typically has increased year over year on average since 2008. We actually had a record year in 2023, which I'll talk about here in just a second. The low-income weatherization has remained relatively steady. However, in 2023, we had a record year with over 100 projects completed, and we're looking to hopefully repeat that performance again this year and in 2025. And commercial program is going to be a bit more cyclical than the rest of our programs. There are some smaller projects that come up, such as like fridge doors for a Walmart or doing some insulation projects for some companies. However, this program definitely relies on some very large one-off projects, such as naval bases, such as very large production companies, or there's actually a mushroom farm in the past that was a huge amount of therm savings. So you'll see that typically go up and down with some large, like even a bumper crop year, you could say every approximately 5 years. On the right, I'll direct your attention to our preliminary 2023 savings. These are numbers that we shared during the January 17th Conservation Advisory Group meeting, so I'm happy to share them. However, they'll actually be fully audited and finalized when we file our biennial report come this June. In terms of therm savings, the residential program saved just over 600,000 therms. That is a record. It's about 39% more than we have saved in a year in the past, which was back in 2021. I really can't say enough great things. Carrie Buren runs that team and our program delivery team. I see some other folks on the line like Des and Joseph and Jacinda. I'm sure there's other folks, but just huge compliments to that team. Rising through adversity, manager turnover, some staffing shortages, and just getting that program really dialed in, making sure we're still turning over projects as quick as possible and sending our customers their rebate checks as quickly as possible. That's a huge goal for us. You'll also know in the residential program, we gave out just over $6 million last year. That is also a record. And we saved just right around 99% of our biennial residential therm savings goal, which is fantastic. On the commercial side, about 430,000 therms were saved last year. And on the low-income side, which is a little bit of a different measurement, just over 15,000 therms saved over those 100+ projects. Congratulations once again to Noemi and Sheila, if she's on the phone, for driving that program and even more so in the next coming years. I should also mention, anyone on the line, like Brian mentioned, feel free to raise your hand, ask any questions at the end of each slide. We also have some time at the end of the presentation to ask any questions. I've only got, say, 20 or so, maybe 30 minutes of content, so we should have plenty of time to discuss and ask any questions that you'd like. Looks like Byron has his hand up. Yep.
Yeah, going back to the previous slide, it sounds like the work you guys did this last year is really, really impressive. I guess I have a question about, do you see being able to continue that as like a growing trend, or is that more of like another kind of like year dip, but still part of like an onward and upward trend? Like how should we understand this last year's data and your team's accomplishments?
Great question, Byron. I would say more so on your second side of things, where we're having that upward trend happening. However, 600+ thousand therms is by far more than a record we've had in the past. Seeing that number again would be fantastic. If I recall correctly, our therm savings goal for 2024 on the residential side is right around 450,000 therms. So it's about 20%, 25% less than that, which would be the goal we're aiming for this year. At this point, however, we are ahead of that pace. So if we hit 600,000 therms again, I wouldn't be surprised. It'd be a fantastic result. That's the case. Does that answer your question, Byron?
Yeah. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you. Moving on to the conservation potential assessment, I got just a couple of slides here. It's a relatively complex topic that we actually spend right around 9 or so months producing, creating, and working with Applied Energy Group, AEG, who runs this conservation potential assessment for us. I've just got 2 slides here to spend talking about that process and the framework of how it works. However, if anyone would like to talk about any of the inputs or the mindsets or the time that we go through in updating the CPA forecast every 2 years, I'm more than happy to do so either on this call or off this call at a later date. You can see this first slide breaks down the inputs and outputs of the model. I think it's really important to note what a model does and what it does not do. And typically, what it does not do is produce new inputs, but it does produce new outputs. In terms of inputs into the model, broken into 3 categories. The first one being a market characterization. This is one of the first things that we work on. One of the items is customer segmentation. You can think about this once again for the 3 different segments of the business: residential, commercial, and industrial. For each of those segments, for the residential side, we break down approximately by income group as well as by a single family or multifamily home for each of our 3 climate zones 1, 2, and 3 across the different parts of the state. On the commercial side, it's more broken down by what that commercial item is. Is it a restaurant? Is it a hotel? Do they produce something? That sort of thing. Is it a warehouse? Those have different usage rates, different characteristics for hours and occupancy. So we break those down as best we can with the data that we have. Data comes from internal, historical, as well as from things like the residential building stock assessment and the commercial building stock assessment that NEA provides every handful of years. Next piece of market characterization, reading on the list, thinking about market size, equipment saturation, tech shares, and vintage distribution. This is where we get a little more nitty gritty in forecasting how much availability is out there in terms of what equipment is currently installed in homes. You could think of what percentage of homes currently have a low efficient furnace or a high efficient furnace. You could also think about how many people are in each climate zone or how many are anticipated to live in single family or multifamily homes on the residential side. The equipment saturation, technology shares, and vintage distribution are kind of 3 things all aimed towards the same thing, which is saying what's currently out there and how much do we have available to incentivize to become more efficient. Equipment saturation, once again, it's percentage that we currently feel is in the market. So it's 1 minus that percentage would say how much is available. Technology shares a similar mindset. It's more so about when is technology coming onto market. So we could forecast different scenarios of, say, high efficient gas heat pumps coming on 2029 would be an example. And that means you have more efficient gas heat pumps available. You'd also likely have less gas furnace replacements going in. So it's, a bit of a yin and yang experience. And then vintage distribution, you could say it's a summary of the lifespan on average for equipment. So it's all about averages for this model. So we don't want to think about individual, say, water heaters burning out or people replacing them early, because there's also people who would replace them longer than lifespan would be anticipated, for example. So it's all about the average of the vintage distribution. And then on average, they fail over a certain amount of time. And that means at that time, they're likely to do, or I should say a portion are likely to do an energy efficient project. And that leads towards our potential. Next 2 pieces, unit energy consumption and new construction profile. Same thing, trying to build up what our market is like and how much availability is out there. Byron, I see another hand up. You're welcome.
Yeah, I have a question for kind of you and Brian at the same time. So when it comes to the CPA and this information, how it's getting put into the IRP model, is that you guys are going to create a new CPA for the IRP, or are we picking up the 2023 IRP and plugging it into the 2025 IRP or 2023 CPA and plug into the 2025 IRP? Like, what's the order of operations here?
Yeah, Brian, would you like me to answer that? I'm going to go ahead and just give you my opinion, Byron. So with timing, it's going to be most likely our 2023 CPA getting plugged into this upcoming IRP. However, we are able to run alternative scenario analysis if the IRP team would like to experience, or I should say experiment with something that wasn't considered in our last CPA. However, we are starting this upcoming CPA earlier than we have in the past as the plan. We're planning on kicking off late this summer. So we'd like to be able to incorporate ideas or scenarios actually into the CPA if we would like. So it depends a bit on the timing there, but there's a lot of different opportunities that we have.
Okay,
Brian,
so it sounds like,
go ahead.
So it sounds like if there were feedback about, say, like changed avoided costs, and the IRP team were to tinker with that, that would be allowed to be able to kind of factor into what goes into the IRP model then, if I'm understanding you correctly.
Yeah, Byron, I agree with that. I think that is a possibility that'd be an alternative scenario run. So we'd use the same setup, the same market characterization and characteristics from the 2023 CPA and change an input. And input is the avoided cost, which is one of these things coming up. And then we would be able to produce a scenario. I believe in the last IRP, we produced our regular CPA result and then 2 or 3 alternative scenarios like electrification, the low avoided cost, some other things that we can do on there. So both not unprecedented and possible, Byron.
Awesome. Thanks for that clarification.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, and Caleb, sorry, I'm having some technical difficulties on my computer, and I can't find my mouse, and it's not working on my laptop or with my mouse. So I'm gonna be working off of Devin's computer until I get that fixed.
Yeah, no problem. You're loud and clear at this point, Brian, so that'll work.
Yep.
Closing up on the input portion here, we have projection data and the actual analysis. Projection data, we talked about customer growth, energy prices, elasticities. Customer growth and energy price in particular, things that are inputs into the model that the resource planning team provides. I believe Devin has historically in the past. Looks like we have a hand up there. Quinn?
Yeah, I'm curious about how you are incorporating some of the provisions in the IRA and IIJA into that economic analysis.
Yes, certainly. From a bigger picture, our company is reviewing the IRA and the IIJA really from a company perspective, not necessarily from an energy efficiency only perspective. At this point, we're seeing a lot of it being more on an electric or electricity like conversion sort of mindset. So there was some opportunities from EE there. There was not a whole lot of IRA or IIJA analysis incorporated in the 2023 CPA. On a bigger picture, when we're rerunning this upcoming CPA in this fall and this late this summer, we do welcome any sort of input on our conservation advisory group meetings from the commission, or even just any input that you'd like to provide personally, Quinn, to help us either produce scenarios or run the actual analysis based off those assumptions.
Great, thank you, Caleb.
Yeah, certainly. I'm going to skip around just a bit here, make sure we're keeping on and moving on. But the energy efficiency analysis, same things. We evaluate existing participation, applicability. Ramp rates is something it's only one line on here, but it's a really big piece of the puzzle. Ramp rates we are required to use from the Northwest Power Conservation Council, and then we adjust to what we're seeing currently in our market. I think I actually received a question beforehand about some changes that run around an inflection point in 2035 for achievable UCT forecast. And that's really all about ramp rates. You can see a lot of the ramp rates for equipment adjust either 100% applicability by 2035, or there's an inversion point in that ramp rate itself. They both do about the same thing in the model on a cumulative scale. Jump down to the bottom of the screen here, and I promise we'll move on to the next slide in just a second. The outputs from this model, we have a base year energy consumption, which you'll see as a baseline in the top table coming up in a couple of slides here. And then we have baseline projection results, which are going to be energy efficiency projections. There's 3 different ones that we look at, looking at kind of tiers going down. The baseline projection is how much gas energy is being used in this segment in the market at that year, typically on an incremental basis. Incremental being a 1 year, cumulative being the sum of all the years from the starting point. Energy efficient projections then go from technical down to achievable technical and achievable economic. We can get in and talk about what the differences are there. It's actually all outlined though in the CPA filing that we did back in June of 2023. I believe that document is UG 210838 if anyone's on the line cares to go look it up.
Hey, Caleb, I think we have a question.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I apologize.
No problem.
Hey, Caleb, I think that might be me, Claire Valentine Fossum with Oregon PUC. Hey, I'm just curious because I think you mentioned AEG is doing this for you, and I think I've seen a lot of AEG doing work for a lot of entities, and I'm just curious, like, is there a process in this where you can kind of like either learn from past examples or what other utilities are finding? Like, is there some sort of way to, like, because you're all using AEG, that you can either like leverage past learnings or collaborate or just something like that when you're developing this framework, especially for like around gas planning?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's a really fair one to ask as well. To my knowledge, AEG produces Cascades, Northwest Naturals, and Avista's CPA for the last iteration. I believe PSC either does it in-house or has a different company assist them. So yes, certainly. Our specific contact at AEG actually does work primarily on the Avista CPA, and I know that they're involved either on the back end or on some advisory pieces of the Northwest Natural. So it really is all a collaborative effort. Honestly, it's fantastic from my perspective. It helps us be collaborative in what our assumptions are on like code and rules and administration changes, for example. It helps us understand what sort of emerging market penetration or emerging technology we're all anticipating to come on the market, similar climate zones, similar different territories. We do find that it's better to be in line and understanding where those assumptions are and being able to start from the source with our advisory team, knowing that they're already. It's fantastic, and I really can't compliment that team enough.
Great, thank you.
Did I answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. See if I can move on to the second slide here. Oh, sorry, one too many. This is the last piece of the load map analysis framework. It starts from a bottom-up approach, and that's how this is modeled. So if you're looking at the screen, you want to be looking upwards, starting at number 1. It's a summary of what we talked about on the last screen. It's a control totals and market profile, where we set the market characterization. You can think of it as setting the base. Where are you starting from? If there was no energy efficiency out there, either for our territory or Washington or in the nation, this is what we anticipate happening. We get that data from different sources, either from EM&V, which is the evaluation, measurement, verification on our specific program with pre-post billing analysis. That's probably the best source of data. It's very specific. The second one is from the RTF, which is the Regional Technical Forum. They've got a ton of different workbooks and different assumptions that we can use to inform, what equipment is out there, what the cost of it, the saving assumption, that sort of thing. And then in particular, we also have the AOE, a different analysis on a federal level that we can use to inform data if what we're seeing in the RTF or analysis is not quite aligning with what our expectations were. So different ways we can do that. Most important piece is it's all sourced inside in the load map data points. So we can go in and see exactly what was referenced, why it was referenced, what assumptions were made there, so we can understand when questions arise, what the model can answer and what it can't answer. Looks like a question from Quinn.
Hi, yes, Quinn Weber, Washington UTC again. Didn't announce myself the first time. I'm curious if any of those models take equity into account and do an equity analysis of who's able to participate.
Yeah, they certainly do, Quinn. Noemi, you're welcome to jump on the line and talk about our low-income program and an equity analysis. I can also speak about it specifically for the CPA. Quinn, is there a specific aspect or thing you're looking to discuss? Equity is a pretty big topic, right?
Mainly just about, levels of participation amongst low-income communities and whether or not it's forecasting for that.
Sure. From the CPA perspective, it's going to be different than our low-income weatherization program. You can think of that as a separate analysis, a separate program being run. From the CPA analysis, which would impact our regular residential program, yes, we do segment down into a low-income, a moderate income, and a regular income group is what it's called. Then we segment down by the 3 climate zones, and then we also designate what portion are going to be in single-family homes or multifamily homes. The reason we do it like that is to incorporate a different usage rates of energy, typically among those different styles. So low income would typically have a lower energy usage rate on average. Multifamily homes would also have a lower energy usage rate on average, and the different climate zones are going to have more or less depending on the HDDs or the heating degree days that are applicable for that zone. That then provides what sort of market penetration we have for each of those different categories, because each of those different categories would have slightly different potential, slightly different incremental costs for the equipment, based on sizing, for example, by how much gas is needed to fuel it. So that's some of the pieces there. Noemi, would you care to summarize some of the equity that's going on in our low-income weatherization program? I know we've talked about it quite a bit.
Yeah, thank you, Caleb, and thank you for the question, Quinn. So we've begun to address some of the equity considerations in our energy efficiency program with our low-income weatherization program. This program begins to bridge the gap between the regular incentives accessible to all customers and the additional incentives available to income qualified customers who otherwise may not have the resources to access the standard energy efficiency program. We work with the agencies across Washington who are funded by the Department of Commerce. Our local agencies give priority, but also are not limited to provide weatherization services to some of these, and I'm going to list some of these individuals that take priority in weatherization. The elderly who are 60 years of age or older, persons with disabilities, children 19 years of age or under, giving priority with those that have children with the age of 1 or younger, high residential energy users, households with high energy burden, and Native American, particularly emphasis in households residing in reservations. The Weatherization Incentive Program provides energy efficiency measures, health and safety, and repairs to income qualified households at no cost to customers. And these are just some of the areas that we're focusing to address equity considerations in our energy efficiency programs. So that's just some additional context there. And hopefully that answered your question, Quinn.
It did. Thank you very much.
You're muted, Caleb.
Sorry, yeah, mute button. I get a couple more free passes on that, please, today. Moving up the chart here, we've got our equipment input generator. Let's think about the equipment stock. I talked about that a bit on the past slide, but the equipment stock, you think of what's currently in the market. X% of homes in this characterization have high efficient furnaces already. This amount have low efficient furnaces. And then we can estimate when different technology is going to come online, say like 2029 for a heat pump I mentioned previously. It could be 2032 for a new water heater. It's all about what assumptions go into it. And that's really one of the big pieces is investigating what the equipment is currently being researched, when it's estimated to come online, what the actual savings and the impact is going to have on the market. That's something I'm really happy to have AEG helping us with on. Sorry, looks like I just accidentally went forward here. There we go. Next, the third piece is producing a baseline module. Baseline projection, this is going to be that reference case. Reference case is a great way to think about it. If there was not energy efficiency programs going on out there, or perhaps other things going on in terms of incentives, this is what would happen in terms of total energy usage, total gas being consumed by this customer base, by segment, by area, that sort of thing. What I think are the most important or the most interesting are the result pieces here, which is going to be number 4 and number 5. Number 4 being the non-equipment measures or the input generator for NEMs, which is modifying that usage based on like options and connections that are going on. So modifying that usage could be once again by income group or by type of home. It could be modifying that usage based on our assumptions for home turnovers. We know on average existing homes perform differently in terms of energy than new homes. So we have, I believe, like a 1.4% decay rate was incorporated in the last CPA, for example. It's also modifying usage for the commercial side by what type of things are being produced, if that production is going to be changed, or on, say, the housing side, I should say on the hotel side is one of the pieces of commercial, you can modify what you anticipate the trends in that business will be. There's quite a bit of informing pieces on there and research that goes into that. That part actually usually takes a couple of months to get through in terms of generating the non-equipment items. Looks like Heather Moline has her hand up.
Thank you, Heather with UTC. And just some of this lingo I haven't heard before, so I'm just wanting to make sure I'm understanding it. So the word generator is just meaning a tool that creates something. It has nothing to do with any energy concept. So non-equipment measure input generator is, this is a thing that LoadMap goes through to create things that alter the CPA that are not related to the actual equipment itself.
Yeah, I agree with almost all of that. It's not going to be altering the CPA. It's going to be a part of the CPA informing the potential model. Another part of non-equipment measures, really important to the residential program, is insulation. So it's informing, we don't have a bunch of information on how much insulation is in each home. It's not something that's typically recorded like the average house might have a certain vintage of furnace. So it's generating that based on averages either in the climate or based on like RTF workbooks, DOE information, or information that AEG actually has on the proprietary side of things. It's a great question though, Heather. Did I answer it?
You did. One more follow-up. Ramp rates, where have we gotten to where ramp rates are plugged in yet?
Ramp rates are going to be a part of the equipment stock as well as modifying usage. They're a really big part of it. It's actually Appendix D, I believe, in our CPA filing, if anyone chooses to go and view that. The ramp rates are going to be impacted and segmented down based on the income style as well as the different lifespans of the equipment items. This is all coming from the Northwest Power Conservation Council, which is on the electric side of things. So then AEG modifies it to be more relevant towards the natural gas market and our market specifically. There's a lot of math that goes behind it because, you know, as different curves intersect and as they interact with each other, there's different decaying effects, different multitude effects, that sort of thing.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, certainly. Once again, Appendix D on the CPA, you could view all those different ramp rates that were incorporated in there. And then we actually have a module that's for every single equipment item or non-equipment item based on their climate zone or the item. It actually lists out which ramp rate's applicable on there. So we can always go back and double check which one is applicable to each item. Lastly, number 5 is a potential module. This is kind of the result. This is what we inform the final CPA report on. It's putting it all together. It's where we estimate the potential based on those 4 different factors that I showed on the last screen. The baseline, then you have the technical potential, the achievable technical potential, and then the achievable economic potential. Each of those being screenings to get more towards what is actually feasible for the program. Great. I've got maybe half a dozen or so slides that are going to show the results of that 2023 CPA broken down by the portfolio, which is all 3 of those segments combined. Then we'll talk about the residential, then the commercial, then the industrial results here. I'm not going to read through all the tables that we have going on here, but you can see the general trend that's going to be popping up. In the top left, you'll have a table of our energy efficiency potential. Once again, breaking down by those 4 different categories. The top one you'll see is the baseline projection in thousands of therms. How you can interpret this is, according to the CPA, we're anticipating in 2024 on the portfolio, 229,381 therms of gas usage. Savings is all a function of how much is being used. Same thing as your house saving rate is a function of how much income you have. It's the exact same idea. That's going to be an incremental basis. So each year, that number on this chart, you could say resets. It is not cumulative. Some of these ones below are cumulative, and that makes a big difference over time. You can see in terms of portfolio in 2024, we're anticipating that 230,000 therms-ish being used. 2043, cutting that down to about 170,000 therms. So we're expecting less baseline usage over time in the 20-year forecast horizon. And then below, you have cumulative savings in thousands of therms. That's going to be cumulative summing up. So you can see both UCT, utility cost test, and TRC, total resource cost, achievable economic potential. The more important one for our program at this point is the UCT, achievable economic potential. That's the numbers that we quote. That's the numbers that we work on for cost effectiveness, for savings assumptions, that sort of thing. So everything that I'll talk about typically going forward is going to be UCT, achievable economic potential. For the biennium, we work on a biennium timeline typically. We're looking at 1.782 million therms of savings potential is the estimate. You could break that down into about 815,000 therms in 2024, and mental math, right around 970,000 therms in 2025 for the portfolio. TRC is slightly less than that. We received a question beforehand about the energy efficiency potential over time. Are we seeing that going up or going down? You could actually do the math from this screen alone if you chose. You can see in 2024, we're anticipating about 815,000 therms of potential being out there. In 2043, which is a 20-year total, we're looking at right around 23,700 therms being out there, which is just over 1,000 therms per year. So in that case, 1,000 is more than 800. So we're looking at it typically increasing over time in general. The second half of this table is the cumulative savings as a percentage of baseline. Really, it's the same information I've just shared with you. I chose to include it on here, but you can see that being a portion of the amount of gas being used. How much of it do we think we could save over time in a cumulative sense? The lower right, I won't spend too much time talking about it. It's the exact same information shown in graph form. You can see that scale of how we're, say, trimming things down based on the potentials or the economic screening going on. The regular orange is going to be the technical potential, the most that's out there, given no economic screening, no cost effectiveness screening, pie in the sky type of mindset, going down from technical potential to achievable UCT potential, and then typically achievable economic TRC potential is the lowest of the 4. So we just showed the portfolio, which is a summary of residential, commercial, industrial. I'm going to break down the residential first, and then we'll go to the other 2 as well. Here's a nice screen showing the 2045 forecast, so just over 20 years on the cumulative UCT achievable potential forecast by color code. Red is space heating. Space heating is not just, say, furnaces. It's also insulation, which we know impacts both primary and secondary heating measures. That's why it's going to be a large contributor. Thermostats are also in there. Those 3 items, really it's more than 3 items, but insulation, furnaces, thermostats, kind of the bread and butter of the program. They make up a huge majority of what we're looking at over time and currently. Secondary heating, typically it's fireplaces or hearths. water heating. We know we do tankless water heaters for our program. We don't have any sort of tanked water heating availability. Appliances, typically we call those lifestyle items, clothes washers and natural gas stove tops or ranges are the most typical items for appliances. Miscellaneous is very small. It's like exterior doors, for example, are going to be some items that are included in miscellaneous as well as in the space heating category. Looks like John has their hand up.
Hey, thanks for taking my question. I know this is, well, I guess one thing that's occurred to me is we're seeing more and more that people need air conditioning. And I'm curious how you consider, it wouldn't be replacing usage, right? Necessarily a huge amount of usage that we're seeing today. But, is the need, you also mentioned the value of insulation for space heating. I wonder if it also carries, value for air conditioning and if you integrate that.
Yeah, awesome question. It's actually a bunch to unpack here. We can talk about just a segment of it. John, can I also ask you to introduce your title and maybe perhaps who you're representing or who you're with?
Yeah, sorry about that. I'm John Garrett with Oregon Cub. I'm an analyst at Cub.
Yeah, fantastic. So the question is the impact of things like, is how I'll assume it, air conditioning on our potential and how our savings are. I think I can summarize that as air conditioning in our case, since we don't actually incentivize a gas use for an air conditioner, it's going to be on the electric side. Typically, we're going to think about that as an NEI or an NEB, so a non-energy impact or a non-energy benefit for us here. How we've done it typically with our UCT forecast is having a 10% adder to incorporate all the things which are not necessarily quantifiable currently. However, we know they're out there. You could also think about an NEI being people not having to leave their homes due to high energy burden because they were able to, say, insulate and decrease their housing bill. So there's quite a few pieces in there. John, one thing that's interesting with us being a sole gas utility is we aren't able to directly incorporate the savings of, say, decreased electric usage for an air conditioner with the insulation job, whereas someone like PSE that does both gas and electric, they are able to claim some of those savings in their model and have some more accurate assumptions of what those savings are. There's different also potentials in the future for that, such as like a fuel switching. What's the sort of value towards our system, towards our NEIs or NEBs for that? I anticipate that's something we're going to talk about more in our 2025 CPA, but I don't have a whole lot more to share on the 2023 CPA about that. Does that answer your question, John?
Yeah, thank you. That's what I was looking for. So I'll look forward to that. Thank you.
Yeah, certainly. I'll try to move on to the next screen here. Let's see. Okay. This table might look familiar. It looks a lot like the one we showed on a couple of screens prior. Same thing, baseline forecast. We can see that's the energy usage just on a baseline level. 2024 is higher than 2043. That means we're anticipating less gas being used by our customers over time. Most important number on this screen, in my opinion, is the achievable economic UCT potential in 2025. That informs our biennial savings goal that we're currently working on. 970,000 therms is our goal. And like I mentioned previously, just under 450,000 therms on the UCT potential is our goal on the residential side for this specific year. These are residential top 10 measures according to the CPA. I'll make that specific. This is according to the CPA. This is not according to the actual specific data that we're seeing on hand that I can pull from our Xair database. However, it's actually pretty representative. We're seeing that insulation, furnaces, water heaters, and things like duct sealing make up a large majority of our program, which is exactly what we're seeing currently. Insulation and furnaces being about half the program is relatively similar to our current expectations. And we're actually hoping to see the insulation number go up even farther, perhaps in the future. We have some really dedicated trade allies, in particular our point of sale vendors, which I could talk about if we'd like. Stephanie's our trade ally coordinator, or I should say our point of sale coordinator, does a fantastic job of getting new insulation contractors and HVAC contractors involved with the program and really out in the field improving people's homes. Heather, would you like to ask a question?
Yeah, Heather Washington, UTC again. I think I just heard you say this, but just repeating it. So this is what's available technically and economically. It's not necessarily what you all will pursue or what people are actually doing.
Ooh, yeah, that's a really good question. So this screen specifically is what the CPA forecasted we will be seeing in 2024 and 2025 to reach that 447,000 therm number and then the 870,000 therm number. This is a breakdown of what they're forecasting we should see. If there was a huge disconnect between this forecast and what we're actually seeing, that would indicate something's probably not right with our CPA analysis or the setup or the assumptions we're using. The fact that it is similar to what we're seeing, that gives a bit of a confidence that what we're doing is likely right, that the goal is likely reasonable, and that we probably won't need to change our mindset or methodologies too much for the next iteration. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Sure, certainly. Great questions, everyone, by the way. I welcome any ones that might pop up as well. Once again, at the end, we can ask any bigger picture questions anyone would like to ask. Moving on to the commercial industrial side of things. Commercial forecast, similar table, you can see the top going from about 85,000 therms in 2024 being forecast to be used down to about 51,000 therms. And then once again, focusing on achievable economic UCT potential. 2024, we're looking at just over 300,000 therms. 2025, we're looking at just over 670,000 therms. One thing, it's not a part of this forecast, but I figured it's important for the group to be informed. There is some large projects. I mentioned how about every 5 or so years we have a large project that comes onto the system, that comes on the radar, and we are anticipating a quite large system on a Navy base coming up for both 2024 and 2025 savings. So at this point, we are looking pretty confident in terms of hitting the savings goal that's listed on this table here. It's fantastic news, even though we're only about 2 months into the biennium. Commercial top 10 measures, don't need to share a whole lot more. You can read on the screen. Same thing, insulations, gas boilers, water heaters. It's pretty common and pretty typical what we're seeing actually in the market. So that represents that the CPA is likely fairly reasonable and fairly accurate in the assumptions of what equipment's being replaced in the real world. Sharing the industrial forecast. Industrial, think of typically of producers. Baseline forecast is different. It's worth noting. Baseline forecast in 2024 is about 20,000 therms being used by this segment, and 2043 is going up fairly slightly to about 25,000 therms. That's going to be driven primarily by the average usage per industrial application, and we assume going up slightly. But also, it's about the customer counts. That we adjusted for the CPA went down fairly significantly. I should say they went up somewhat on the residential and commercial side, but pretty modestly. On the industrial side, they went up a little bit more, and that kind of outweighs the decrease in the usage that our commercial and residential side is seeing, which is why their forecast is decreasing. There's a lot of factors at play there, but I think that's a good high-level summary of what's causing that. Don't really need to read out too much more. You can see the achievable economic UCT potential, 68,000 therms and 142,000 therms. Typically, we even report these things. You saw it, commercial and industrial are combined. They are both implemented by TRC, who runs that program. So when they have a specific goal that we give them, it's combining those two numbers. Industrial top 10 measures. The big one on here that we're actually just starting a pilot for and trying to grow, so this is not currently represented in the market that we're seeing, is the strategic energy management. We typically call that SEM. You can think of it as being an expert walking through buildings, working with the the building coordinator or the maintenance manager to make sure equipment is being serviced, being used correctly, is being sized correctly. If there's any changes to make things more efficient, it's more of a custom approach rather than a prescriptive approach. Prescriptive being you can easily model it. There's typical assumptions of how it's installed, how it's used, what the usage rates are, and the therm savings are. Custom, the opposite. Custom is going to be a little bit harder to model, and that's really common for industrial. We know residential, a lot of homes are built fairly similar occupancy rates that you can average. Industrial is a little more diverse and bigger scale of different possibilities that could be happening in that building or in that area. I think we're getting really close to the end here. This is a feedback slide for Cascade. We're welcome to receive any input on our changes or ideas that we should consider for the energy efficiency modeling. As a bigger picture, I already mentioned it. We have a July 17th Conservation Advisory Group meeting. I plan on bringing up our plans for the 2025 CPA at that meeting. I also plan on engaging with AEG after that meeting to start the process up and have really close to a full year to actually fully model and fully implement any suggestions or changes to the model, so we're not crushed for time or pushed at the end there. Looks like we have a hand up.
Hey, Caleb, this is Claire again. You might have mentioned this and I just didn't hear it, but for the strategic energy management, did you say, is this like something where the company itself would be doing sort of the audit, or is this a third party, or can you just explain a little bit more how that would work?
Yeah, currently how it's working is our commercial implementer, who's TRC. They're actually previously called Lockheed Martin. We've been partnered with them since 2008, so we're 15 years now. They're starting up as a pilot offering. It's not something that they offered in the past, but we saw it being reflected in the CPA as having high potential. So they're trying to really boots on the ground style at this point of getting, calling out and reaching out to these industrial companies as well as commercial buildings, by the way, to walk through their systems, to audit how they're being used, to make sure things are being sized appropriately, and then also give any recommendations if they were to choose to replace something or if something were to fail. Here's what you should be looking at on a high efficient standard. I hope that helps you understand, but this is something that's being developed and it's definitely not representing 25% of our savings potential at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I think what I heard is you're partnering with are partnering with TRC and then offering this as a voluntary or something that can be taken up, and then you will have access to the information that's found from the assessment, regardless of whether the whoever is doing whoever has the assessment done wants to actually take up those the recommendations. Does that sum it up correctly?
Yep, I agree with that. It would actually be
Okay.
TRC doing it in-house at this point. Physically either doing that walkthrough or doing like a virtual call is another offering I understand they can do. So they do have the information in-house because they're doing it in-house, and we can work with them to analyze it. At this point, there's only been, I believe, a couple of walkthroughs done, so not a lot to talk about, honestly.
Great, thank you.
Back to this slide, Brian, maybe you want to jump in as well. I'm not sure if anything else on the agenda here, but if there's any questions we could answer, I know especially the UCT or our staff members provided quite a few questions in advance. Hopefully we'll be able to answer quite a few of them. If there's any that are outstanding, I'm welcome to talk about them right now, or however you'd like to proceed with that.
Yeah, I think that's what we're looking for, is any feedback right now if anyone has it. I've opened these meetings up to be longer. We don't need to take any more time if there are no more questions. If anyone has any feedback or any questions that come up after this meeting, feel free to shoot those our way. I think in a later slide we we include our IRP email address, so you're able to send some questions that way, and we'll try to respond to them as quickly as we can. But yeah, I'll just leave it open for 10 seconds or so, see if there's any more questions. If not, we'll move on to the next slide. I see Heather has a question.
Oh, as in there's more content to the meeting, or?
Just a wrap up slides.
Okay. This is just a general observation then, which is you all know your stuff, and I appreciate you fielding and answering questions. I think you will get better feedback if you move at a more reasonable pace and you do leave space in between slides for people to just chew on what they see there. I definitely appreciate all the great information, but it did move a little fast, and I'm somebody who's been doing this for 4 years, so thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that feedback. All right, is there anything else from anyone? Again, if there's more feedback, we'll have this, we'll post the presentation, the meeting minutes, and the video recording in about a week's time. And if you watch back that meeting again and come up with more questions, please feel free to reach out to us. The reason for these targeted tags, we're doing them well in advance of when we are actually going to do the modeling and produce the results. So if you come up with more questions in 2 weeks, please feel free to send them our way. Once we get to the longer tag meetings later on in the year, that's when we'll need to start locking in numbers. But feel free to watch this back, to read the minutes. We'll try to capture as many questions and responses as possible in those minutes. And then, yeah, if you have any more feedback, that would be great. Yeah, if you don't mind, will you advance it another to the next? Yeah, thank you. So yeah, today we did the energy efficiency meeting. At the end of this month, on Thursday, March 28th, we'll be doing the equity in the IRP meeting. In April, we'll run a customer and load forecast meeting. And then in May, we have 3 meetings. We'll be discussing CCA compliance modeling, distribution modeling, and then resource integration. And then in June, we'll be holding a longer presentation where we'll actually discuss some methodology changes that came from these targeted tags, and then we'll also discuss results from some of these different methodologies, and then hopefully we can lock in some numbers soon after those so we can move on to the next steps. So that'll take place June 13th, hoping to receive feedback at the end of June. We'll run tag 2 at the end of July. We'll try to get feedback from that meeting, and we'll file a draft. Try and get feedback from that. And then we will hold a 3rd tag meeting where we'll discuss final results. And then we'll file our final draft, get feedback on that. Hold a 4th tag if needed in January, and then we'll try to get this filed in February. And Kara, I see you have a question.
Yeah, my apologies for missing the first 45 minutes of this meeting. You all were very efficient, it seems like, on your efficiency topic. So you may have covered this, or it may just not have been part of this presentation, but curious if you all are thinking about the climate protection program, and of course the invalidation of the rules for now, but the rulemaking that will be initiated this year. And how some of these learnings or studies might apply to your transport customers. I know that right now you're not on the hook for those transport customers, but we did hear from public utility commissioners on Avista's final IRP meeting maybe 2 weeks ago, or maybe just last week, questions about how the company plans to move forward there with their transportation customers. And at least I heard some support for that. So just curious, probably not on the agenda today, but if you're at all thinking about maybe how some of these measures might unroll for transport customers. And if not, why not?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I know that we were doing some stuff on transport energy efficiency. And no, I mean, do we have an update on where we are on that? I think some stuff got paused, but I didn't know if it got recontinued.
No, it's still paused.
Okay.
Until there's a decision. Yeah.
So I guess
I'm not sure
that you might be prepared to talk about that a little bit with the commissioners next week. I could see potentially there being interest in knowing that it's paused. And was it paused because you hadn't yet really designed a program and pushed it out yet, so it was sort of at a good place to pause it? Or are you having to sort of pull back on initiation that you've already begun with those customers?
So this is Lori Blattner, Director Regulatory Affairs for Cascade. And so what our program was doing transport audits. So looking at each, because we don't have a large number of transport customers in Oregon, and so it was easy to kind of coordinate with each customer independently. And so what we were doing was having individual audits of their facilities. And so we've worked through, several of those, kind of taking a pause just to be sure that we don't get too far out ahead of getting something designed without knowing what the CPP is going to actually look like going forward. but it's also something we can easily start back up, once we do get a little bit better direction and kind of feel like we're on solid footing.
Lori, that's really great to hear. Yeah, thank you. I remember hearing about those audits and getting really excited about the possibilities for your customers because you're such a good facilitator, right, between worlds. So that's really great. Did you get a good response from customers on the audits that were completed?
So I think we had some real interest initially from a few customers that had been very interested. And then it's really been a challenge to try to get kind of the next tranche of people interested in, like what's in it for me, kind of is the question. And when you have this CPP in place and it's kind of staring them in the face, that's a little easier sell, than trying to go out now when it seems like it's kind of back to business as usual from their perspective. But I do think there's some benefit even to those customers that don't see a CPP need, to be able to talk about it from just a cost savings kind of standpoint. So I think there's some benefits in continuing it regardless of what happens with the CPP. But then on the other side of it, the CPP has a lot of impact on how we design it. And so
yes, absolutely. Yeah. And you're also thinking about cost recovery appropriately, which is something that Avista was sort of wrangling with too. And I think those are absolutely appropriate questions, but great to hear that you're thinking about it. And then I guess I would ask, are you having similar pushback than on industrial energy efficiency, or do you feel that the same sort of cost effectiveness pitch is working?
I'm not sure if I followed the question.
Oh, I guess I just was thinking about looking through your slides and the evaluation that you have of industry for your industrial customers and the energy efficiency the modeling that you'll be doing, right? And presumably that will lead to programs, if not already programs you're enrolling. Am I wrong about that?
So I believe that the information that Caleb was sharing was related to Washington.
Gotcha.
Kind of specifically. And so, it's a little bit different in Oregon and Washington because ETO delivers a lot of those programs in Oregon. And so the transport question in Washington is a little bit different also because they're not covered by the FCC.
Okay, so this whole industrial forecast summary, that's all Washington, no Oregon in there at all?
I believe that's correct.
Yeah.
Caleb, do you want to?
Yeah. Yep, you are correct. All the numbers we've seen today are Washington specific.
Okay, and will you be doing something for Oregon?
So just to clarify, this IRP process is for Washington specifically.
Okay.
We'll be using some of this information, not the energy efficiency side of things, obviously, but we'll be using some of this information for our Oregon IRP update.
Okay.
But depending on how the demand forecast looks, there's probably just an opportunity to look at using I think using the 2023 IRP energy efficiency numbers for the Oregon IRP update. I think that's historically what has been done. But there may be an opportunity if there's enough changes that would impact energy efficiency that we would coordinate with ETO to get a new expected forecast for the IRP update filing.
Okay, that's super helpful. And apologies then for all these questions about Oregon IRP. I'll just say
no problem.
There's like a million tag meetings coming at me. And so I just assumed you were sort of getting the ball rolling for the next Oregon IRP. So maybe, Brian, you wouldn't mind. I'm looking through the slides and the invitation. I'm like, I don't see anything about this being Washington. So maybe just flag that. And if I missed that, my apologies. But it's also super interesting to see what you're doing for Washington, because I do think right, there's going to be, obviously you're going to have some learnings there that will be useful. So thank you for allowing me to ask questions about Oregon. Appreciate it.
No problem. No, that's good feedback. I'll try to make sure to clarify during when I send the meeting invites out that it's Washington included, and as well as on the cover slide of the presentations. But yeah, getting feedback on the Oregon side is very helpful as well, because like I had mentioned, we will be using a lot of this information. The demand forecast part, I do expect to discuss some stuff in Oregon during that meeting. But this is, yes, specifically towards Washington, and we'll use some of the information for the Oregon IRP update.
Appreciate that. And then, and Brian, I imagine this will be rolled into next, to the extent you can inform the commissioners about what you're thinking. I think it would be helpful for them to hear too in your
definitely
acknowledgement meeting next week.
Yep, definitely. Okay. Are there any other questions, feedback? Okay, Caleb, if you don't mind, if you can send to the next slide.
And just take control back your way. I think it froze for me. Sorry about that.
Oh, okay, no problem. And it appears I have my mouse back now, so. I don't know what I lost control of my mouse whenever I sent over control, so that's never happened before. So yeah, like I mentioned earlier in an earlier slide, the next meeting will be on equity in the IRP. That'll be held Thursday, March 28th. And then here you can see on this slide, irp@cngc.com. Please feel free to send us any comments, any feedback, any questions you may have, and then we'll try to respond to those as soon as we can. And that was it, all that we had. I'm just gonna leave it on this slide here, and I'll open it up for another few seconds to see if anyone raises their hand or jumps on and has any questions or thoughts.
Hello, this is Byron from the Washington UTC. Staff had sent a bunch of questions with kind of like general feedback questions in kind of response to the last slide. Were those questions responded to while I was off? Or?
Yeah, I think Caleb made an attempt to respond to most of those questions. But I think it's in our best interest, and I'm interested to hear your response, but I think it makes sense to also put together some written responses to those.
Okay, yeah. I'll look forward to those written responses, and then we can have a back and forth follow-up if necessary about that.
Yep. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, Kim, I see you have a question.
Thanks. I know we have Kim with Oregon PUC. I would love, even though this is for the Washington IRP, there's a lot of interest from our side in just being really coordinated, recognizing that our two processes are a little bit out of sync right now between us and Washington. It would be I think it could be a really efficient use of time if the questions and answers were something that were made publicly available. And Brian, forgive me if you said how that'd be handled, but that way, we're not asking the same questions that Washington asks, and it, I don't know, gives an opportunity to streamline some of that engagement with the Cascade team.
Yeah, no, definitely. And so Kim, I'm glad you asked that question. So during the meeting, we try to capture as many questions as we can, and we put it into the meeting minutes. But if you also go out to our Washington IRP webpage, you'll see an IRP feedback report, and you'll see that there are some questions there that those questions are like pre-tag questions, post-tag questions,
Oh,
and
great.
as long along with our responses to those questions.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks.
Yeah. Yep. No problem. Okay, I'm not seeing anyone else pop in or have their hand raised. So I will let everyone go. If you have any questions, please reach out to us. Thanks for everyone who attended and gave us valuable feedback and asked very good questions today. We really appreciate it. And we'll see everybody on March 28th.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Yeah, thanks,
Brian and
Brian.
Caleb.
Thanks.
Thanks, Brian and Caleb.
Thank you.
Thank you.